Okay, so last up is Buddha, and that's Ginger, who's apparently coming to say hi. So, Buddha was born a prince in what is now Nepal, and as the legend goes, and of course, we're still in like 500 BC, so, when biographies are told by followers of an individual and this much time has passed, it's hard to separate fact from fiction and from mythology and all those sorts of things. But supposedly his mother had a dream that she gave birth to an elephant out of her side. And she woke up and she was pregnant with Buddha. By some accounts, actually, virgin conception. This was before Jesus, obviously. And that was taken as an omen that the child was going to be great and significant in some way. And his father went to kind of like an oracle, right? Somebody who sort of like makes predictions and gives prophecies and things like that, which were very common in the ancient world, and was told that if the child was exposed to suffering, he would grow up and be the world's greatest teacher. But if he was never exposed to suffering, he would grow up and become the world's greatest ruler. Now, his father being a prince, guess which one he wanted for the son? The ruler. So the goal was to shelter Buddha, born Siddhartha, from all suffering. And apparently they were able to do this. He was in sort of like this castle-like compound his whole life and never allowed to go outside of it into the city. They kept away any family members who were sick. They hid the news of death and anything else that might bring distress to him. Somehow he got married. They must have brought somebody in for him. He had a child. And then one day he finally gets out of the compound, having supposedly never experienced any sort of suffering, and he sees the impact of the pain. He sees a dead body and people being carried for a funeral and people just weeping in agony over the loss of him. He sees somebody homeless. He sees somebody diseased, right? And imagine not knowing that people went through that and then having that hit you all at once. And he realized how horrible suffering and pain are. And he set out on a life mission to try to figure out why we suffer and how to overcome it. He wandered around and he tried everything, right? First, he had tried the life of excess, the life of luxury, the life of having all of his needs met and fulfilling any pleasure, any desire, whenever it came. And surprise, that didn't really ultimately make any suffering go away. And then he tried the opposite. He starved himself, so much so that he said that when he sat, he could feel his spine through his stomach. He afforded no luxuries whatsoever, no possessions, no joy, no pleasures of any kind. And again, big surprise, that really didn't eliminate suffering either. So he ends up going and sitting under a tree, which is now known as the Bodhi tree, and meditating, and just basically said, I'm going to sit here until I figure this out or until I die. Well, he figured it out, and he achieved what we call nirvana. Now, Nirvana is not just a super awesome band from the 90s that you should totally be familiar with if you are not. It is a state of the annihilation of the ego. It's utter bliss. It's the end goal here for Buddhists. That is what we are trying to achieve. And it's not some sort of like, oh, I turn into glitter and float off into the stars, or any sort of maybe like movie adaptation of the moment of enlightenment or nirvana that you might be thinking about. Instead, it's just a totally new perspective that just everything clicks and you just have a completely different viewpoint on the world. And Buddha elected to stay and teach people how to achieve this for themselves. And it's interesting that we hear stories of Buddha getting mad at his followers. So nirvana doesn't necessarily guarantee that there will be no negative emotions or no more pain and suffering, which I think is interesting. So we have the Four Noble Truths, which are sort of the big components of Buddhism. And the first is that all life is suffering. To live is to suffer. Now, this doesn't mean that we're constantly suffering. You might have a really great day. Maybe the whole semester is awesome. Maybe it's just your year and you're just winning all the time. But suffering is consistent. meaning we all suffer regularly. And you have suffered in the past, you might be suffering now, and you definitely will suffer in the future. Now, the term suffering here doesn't just apply to a physical pain, although that's certainly part of it. We get hurt, we get sick, right? Sometimes more seriously than others. Instead, it can refer to anything, right? I'm annoyed by somebody. I'm sad. I'm angry, right? I'm frustrated, right? Any sort of negative emotion qualifies here as suffering. Now, so that's the first one, is that being human means you're going to suffer. The second one is the most controversial, and that is that the reason that we suffer is because of our selfish desires. Now, I don't like the word selfish here because that makes everybody's guard go up, because everybody thinks, well, selfish means you're a bad person and you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, right? And that it's your fault somehow for feeling that way. And that's not really what this means. Instead, this is what it means. The reason that we suffer, the cause of all of our suffering across the board, no matter what it is, the cause of all of it is that I wanted something to go a certain way, and it didn't. And that's why I'm experiencing a negative emotion, because it didn't go the way that I wanted. So I'm heartbroken when somebody dumps me because I didn't want the relationship to end. I'm mad when I get fired because I wanted to keep working at that job. I don't want to have to find another job. I don't want to be worried about how I'm going to pay my rent. I'm sad when I get a cold because I want to be able to breathe. I want to be able to sleep okay. I want to be able to taste food and smell and not cough and not feel like crap, right? I want to feel healthy. I am sad and devastated when somebody I care about who dies because I wanted more time with them. I wanted their family to have more time with them. I didn't want them to leave. Now, I mean, obviously all of these are, I wanted this, I wanted that, I want this. And when I don't get it, that's what makes me upset or angry or sad or mad or frustrated or whatever it is. So, the reason that we suffer is because of our desires that are not met. Now, I want you to think about whether or not that's true. So the next time you feel any sort of negative emotion coming on, think about why you're feeling that way. And see if it's because something didn't go the way you wanted to. Or if maybe you can think of another explanation and reasoning behind the suffering. This maybe also can kind of harken back to our earlier discussion of preferring the yin and wu wei, right? Letting go of some of those desires and control. So that's the second one. That's the controversial one. So all life is suffering. We suffer because we desire things to go our way. Well, I mean, there's good news, right? So if the reason why I'm suffering is because of my desires, well, I can't control what happens to me, always. I can't control what other people choose to do, and I can't always control how that affects me. But I can control how I feel about it. That was one of the earliest pieces of advice I remember my mother giving me. You can't control what people do. You can only control how you respond to it and how much you let it get to you and how you let it affect you. That's very true. That's basically this idea, right? I maybe can't control 100% if somebody breaks up with me or dies or fires me or lies to me or anything like that. But I can control what I desire, right? I can control what I want and what I expect to happen, and I can control how I react when things don't go my way. That's part of being an adult, right? Is you get to decide whether or not something annoys you for 5 minutes or wrecks your whole life, right? If you haven't figured that out yet, that's really up to you, and you shouldn't be blaming other people for that. So, that's the third one, right? If all suffering is by desire, well, I can control my desires. And the way I do that is with number 4, following the Eightfold Path. Now you have a full rundown of the Eightfold Path, having the right understanding of the problem, going for the right purpose, right? The right intention, the right mindfulness, the right livelihood, the right speech, all those sorts of things, right? There's 8 of them. And it's really about changing the way that you approach the situation. And the common themes here are, you got to get your head right for this to work, right? So first and foremost, you have to want to overcome the suffering. If you don't, right, if you don't really want to get over it, you're not going to get over it, right? Anybody who's ever had a friend that does this contest to it, right? So like you have a friend who's in a relationship and it's horrible and they're totally unhappy and they're not treated well and they stay. And you tell them a million times to get out of it and they stay. And it always sucks and they stay. Right? And I mean, eventually you just realize like they're not going to leave until they're ready to leave. Right? And sometimes you can't necessarily rush that. So you can't overcome suffering until you truly want to. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that maybe like suffering. They like drama. They like being upset. They like being angry. And to me, that's very sad to live your life that way. But for some people, they want to be in a state of suffering. And if that's the case, this is not going to work, right? You have to truly want to overcome it and let it go. And then to do that, I mean, you got to be smart about it, right? So you have to have a realistic approach. You have to think about it in the right way. You have to express your thoughts in the right way, because typically our suffering involves somebody else as the source of the suffering. So if I'm trying to overcome a fight or a conflict with a friend or a roommate or whoever, I need to approach that in the right way. And if I come out swearing and yelling and crying, that's not going to be an effective way to overcome the suffering or to get past it by any means. It needs to be something that we can sustain, right? So I don't know how many of you maybe had some totally unrealistic New Year's resolution. I'm going to run 3 miles a day. I'm never going to drink pop again. And I'm going to, right, go vegan. And I'm going to write a novel. And I'm going to, right? I mean, like, you probably can't keep that up every single day, right? That's not realistic. And when we're trying to overcome suffering of any kind, it needs to be a realistic plan that we can sustain. You can't expect more from yourself than what you're realistically capable of doing, because you're not going to overcome suffering. You're just going to become frustrated with yourself, which adds another layer on top of all the suffering. And another important part here is to think about it. Some people have a tendency, and we all do sometimes, to just maybe, if I pretend that this isn't happening or bothering me, then it'll just go away. And by now you probably have learned that that's not the best way to handle things, and it doesn't just go away. It usually comes out expressively at the wrong person at the wrong time. And that's never a good thing. So, I mean, sometimes it's actually been said, like, think about it constantly. Now, that maybe gets a little obsessive, and then that maybe is problematic, actually, but the idea is you can't just ignore it, right? If you really want to overcome it, you can't just pretend that it's not there, that you can power past it, right? You have to deal with it, and you have to go through the different steps. So, it's up to you how much you buy into this whole life plan and philosophy, but I want you to think about it next time you suffer. Not that I want any of you to suffer or have a bad time, but the next time something does upset you, I want you to think about why. And I want you to think about whether or not you think the Eightfold Path could help you overcome that suffering.